In 2024, the Chinese Navy's Shandong aircraft carrier group ended up crossing paths with a U.S. carrier group in the waters east of Taiwan. The Chinese side didn't even notice. It wasn't until radar and communications were jammed that the Shandong hurriedly activated its electronic warfare systems. Two J-15 fighter jets were launched to try and intercept the two U.S. Super Hornets, but by the time the jets took off, the U.S. planes had already left, completing their close reconnaissance with ease. If this had been a real battle, some of the ships in the Shandong's group might have already been sent to the bottom of the sea. However, this embarrassing incident was hyped by Chinese state media as a successful repelling of U.S. aircraft, using grandiose language to cover up the reality. This so-called exercise became one of the most laughable events in recent years, clearly showing outsiders that the Shandong is more of a showpiece than a real combat asset. By December 17, 2024, the Shandong had been in service for 5 years. Xinhua news agency went all out, praising it as a national treasure and a deep-sea sword. But one phrase, from exploration to teaching, unintentionally revealed the truth. Even after 5 years, the carrier was still in its early stages. It took 5 full years just to figure out how to operate and train on the carrier, resulting in nothing more than a basic manual on how to generate combat effectiveness. In other words, when the Shandong was first delivered, not only was there no standardized process in place, but even the most basic operating manual wasn't ready. After 5 long years, all they had to show for it was a single manual on generating carrier combat effectiveness. Isn't this glaringly inefficient and backward progress a blatant mockery of China's industrial military capabilities? On December 31st, Xinhua doubled down, announcing that more than 100 problems had been solved, which was essentially an admission that the carrier had been plagued with issues. So, how many problems remain unresolved? With progress this slow, how can people be confident in its longer-range operations? The reality of the Shandong is far from the powerful image that China tries to project. When it comes to the true core of an aircraft carrier, its carrier-based aircraft, China's confidence is even thinner. The Shandong's main aircraft is the J-15, known officially as the Flying Shark. This plane is an improved version of the abandoned Soviet Su-33. Not only has China failed to fully replace its engines with domestically produced Taihang engines, but most J-15s still rely on Russian AL-31F engines, which are underpowered and heavy. To make matters worse, the J-15 is currently the largest and heaviest carrier-based aircraft in the world. Just by looking at a photo, you can tell. In an effort to cover up the embarrassment, Chinese officials have repeatedly altered the aircraft specifications. They tried to change the empty weight from nearly 20 tons to 18.5 tons, but anyone with knowledge of the industry can see right through this. Independent military enthusiasts in China, who aren't interested in exaggerating, revealed that Sun Cong, the J-15's chief designer, once said the plane's empty weight is about the same as the Su-33, around 20 tons. Fully fueled and armed with 2 medium-range and 2 short-range missiles, the J-15 weighs nearly 30 tons. Even with half fuel, it's about 25.2 tons. An 18.4-ton empty weight is pure fantasy. If the J-15 really were lighter than the Su-33, its range would far exceed the Su-33, yet the official manual lists its range as 3,000 kilometers, exactly the same as the Su-33. The J-15's large size turns it into a giant when fully fueled and armed. As a result, pilots often have to jettison unused missiles or external fuel tanks before landing to avoid exceeding the carrier's weight limit and snapping the arresting cables, which could send the aircraft skidding off the deck. For the electronic warfare variant, D, if it carries 6 pods, pilots must drop 4 of them before landing. Some military experts have revealed that the maximum landing weight for the Shandong's arresting cables is likely between 20 and 22 tons. This means that when the J-15 comes in for landing, it must discard a lot of its payload. If not, an overweight jet could break the arresting cable, endangering crew members on the flight deck, or worse, the aircraft could plunge into the ocean. Videos from Chinese state-run media show that even during normal landings, the engine exhaust at the rear of the J-15 remains highly visible, indicating that the engines aren't fully shut down before landing. This suggests the pilot keeps the engines running in case a go-around is needed. By contrast, U.S. aircraft like the FA-18 rely on more advanced automated landing systems, reducing the pilot's workload. The J-15 is often labeled by military analysts as the worst carrier-based aircraft currently in service. With half fuel fuel and armed weapons, it weighs around 25.2 tons and can climb at a rate of only 228 meters per second, a performance reminiscent of the US Phantom from the 1960s. In modern air combat, this sluggish climb rate could put the J-15 at a severe disadvantage against US fighters. Even the U.S. Navy's least impressive Super Hornet can climb at 260 meters per second with 50% fuel and full weapons load, let alone lighter and more agile jets like the F-15 and F-16. During joint military exercises in Malaysia, the Su-30 MKM, a derivative of the Su-33 and the predecessor of the J-15, was soundly beaten by Super Hornets in dogfights. The J-15 may solve the problem of having a carrier-based jet, but it brings little in terms of actual combat power. The Chinese Navy now pins its hopes on the J-35, but this aircraft still relies on the Fujian carrier's catapult system to launch. If there were any progress with the J-35, Chinese media would have surely bragged about it. The silence suggests that the Fujian's electromagnetic catapult is facing setbacks. On the operational side, some details about Chinese pilots' practices are downright amusing. While U.S. pilots flying FA-18s or F-35s monitor missile flight paths using data links, AESA radars, and helmet-mounted displays, J-15 pilots often resort to physically turning their heads to track missiles with their own eyes. This habit, highlighted in Chinese military videos, became a running joke on international military forums, where it was likened to a fighter jet survival game. Exaggerated or not, the contrast reveals the limitations of China's avionics. It's hard to imagine a U.S. Navy Super Hornet pilot equipped with a JHMCS helmet craning their neck mid-flight to watch for missile hits. They simply launch the missile and rely on their display or data link to confirm, target down. Compared to this, Chinese pilots appear to operate under much greater strain. Adding to the spectacle, footage even shows a tripod-mounted camera awkwardly positioned behind the cockpit of a J-15 during flight. It's as if they forgot to pack up the photo equipment before takeoff, hardly a sign of a cutting-edge carrier operation. The reality of the Shandong aircraft carrier's operations during fleet cruises is even more surprising. The earlier incident, where the Shandong was unaware of a nearby U.S. carrier, happened because the carrier was not adhering to combat readiness requirements during its patrol. No early warning aircraft were launched, and no electronic jamming systems were activated. It wasn't until U.S. reconnaissance planes and fighter jets circled around that the crew realized what had happened. Why does the Chinese Navy operate this way? The answer lies in the Shandong's outdated steam turbines, which burn heavy fuel. It costs around 13 million yuan to fill the ship with 8,000 tons of fuel. To maintain high-speed cruising, all 8 boilers need to be running. However, internal corruption has led to some officers to avoid operating at full power, saving fuel to resell after the mission. As a result, flight training and early warning aircraft sorties are reduced. While the official narrative speaks of deterring enemies from afar, the reality is that fuel-saving measures leave the ship unprepared, even allowing nearby U.S. forces to operate unnoticed. If this qualifies as a blue water navy, it's no wonder potential adversaries remain unfazed. One particularly embarrassing story involves the use of dummy missiles during patrols. The J-15 is too heavy, so in the staged, fully armed photos and videos, the missiles are often just models. In some cases, real missiles are loaded, but the jets perform a short flight near the coast before landing at a land-based airfield. This means that if U.S. carriers appear near Taiwan, Chinese J-15s sent to intercept them may only be carrying empty missile replicas, leaving them defenseless if conflict arises. The design of the Shandong ski jump deck further limits its operational capacity. When J-15s take off, the long runway is occupied, preventing simultaneous landings. This bottleneck may explain China's push for dual carrier group operations. One carrier handles takeoffs, while the other recovers aircraft. However, in wartime, if one carrier is sunk in a saturation attack, the other would struggle to sustain operations alone. This dual insurance concept appears powerful, but is riddled with flaws. The carrier strike group's anti-submarine and air defense systems are another glaring weakness. U.S. carrier groups are accompanied by early Burke-class destroyers, Ticonderoga-class cruisers, B-8 Poseidon sub-hunters, and EA-18G Growler electronic warfare jets, forming a comprehensive network that can detect and engage threats from hundreds of miles away. In contrast, China's three-dimensional defense mostly relies on the Z-18 early warning helicopter, which has limited range. China also lacks experience with nuclear submarine escorts, long-range coordination, and efficient resupply systems. Footage from state media shows refueling hoses manually connected between the Shandong and supply ships, with helicopters dropping supplies into the sea. This stands in stark contrast to the U.S. Navy, Navy's automated basket systems and long-range resupply techniques. Keeping the Chinese carrier group operational in harsh sea conditions would be extremely challenging. In terms of actual deployments and training intensity, the Shandong falls short of claims of frequent high-intensity operations. In its first 3 years of service, it typically sailed only once or twice a year, staying at sea for 20 to 30 days each time, far less than the 150 annual sailing days of U.S. carriers. Although operations have slightly increased in the past 2 years, most missions involve brief trips east of Taiwan, allowing state media to exaggerate its blue water presence. However, every deployment is closely monitored by Japan, the US, the Philippines, and Taiwan. Military forces from these countries track the carrier group's every move, capturing clear images of the J-15s on deck. Taiwan's defense ministry regularly releases detailed radar and optical data, often revealing that Chinese carriers operate relatively close to the mainland. For the US Navy, tracking and shadowing the Shandong is routine, while Chinese carriers struggle to locate U.S. carriers due to their vast operational range. If China attempted to locate and target a U.S. carrier for a saturation attack, the process would be far more challenging than the other way around. Neighboring countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, and Japan remain skeptical of the Shandong's deterrent power. Filipino fishing planes casually fly near disputed areas like the Scarborough Shoal, prompting warnings from dozens of Chinese naval radio warnings but little effective response. It often takes days before Chinese J-16 or H-6 bombers arrive for a show of force. When Chinese carrier groups venture beyond the first island chain, they face a range of vulnerabilities: fuel shortages, resupply challenges, coordination issues, and the constant threat of reconnaissance and strikes from adversaries. These weaknesses weigh heavily on the minds of Chinese military planners. One of the most striking aspects of the Shandong carrier group's resupply operations is the sight of fuel lines strung across the decks and ground crews rushing about, manually connecting and securing them. This process relies heavily on manual labor, demanding precise ship maneuvering and careful coordination by crew members to ensure the two vessels maintain close formation for fuel and water transfers. In some cases, Chinese Navy helicopters simply dropped bundled supplies directly into the sea, resembling an emergency relief airdrop more than a sophisticated naval resupply. If those bundles contain sensitive instruments or electronics, the risk of water damage or impact is high. Calm seas might make recovery possible, but in rough waters, receiving such supplies could be impossible. The close proximity of the supply ship and the carrier also increases the risk of collisions in bad weather. By contrast, the U.S. Navy conducts replenishment at sea at much safer distances between ships, utilizing advanced mechanized and automated systems to reduce workload on sailors. With extensive experience conducting resupply missions at night and in poor sea conditions, U.S. vessels do not need to operate in dangerously tight formations, minimizing both risk and operational stress. However, in the U.S. Navy, or any modern Navy, fuel management is a specialized, team-based effort involving rigorous processes from quality testing to automated fueling systems. The reliance on a single star performer reflects not efficiency, but a lack of proper division of labor and systematic training. By spotlighting individual heroism, China conceals the fact that its internal systems remain underdeveloped. The J-15T, the catapult-launched version of the J-15, was unveiled at the Zhuhai Air Show with a new AESA radar. Chinese media immediately boasted that it was on par with the US AN/APG-79 radar used by the Super Hornet. However, China has long faced technical hurdles in radar miniaturization and reliability, which could limit the new system's actual performance. Key specifications, such as the number of TR modules and cooling capacity, remain undisclosed, and no official combat evaluations have been released. Claims of parity with top-tier systems appear to be more about bolstering morale and attracting attention than reflecting actual capability. Interestingly, U.S. defense media's high praise for the J-15T's radar should also raise eyebrows. This could be a tactic to exaggerate China's military strength, prompting increased defense budgets at home, or a way to lull China into complacency. Ultimately, the J-15T's capabilities can only be verified through real-world combat scenarios. The critical questions are whether the radar can detect and lock onto targets at long range, resist jamming, and maintain stable performance in high-intensity operations. Can it track multiple targets and guide missiles effectively? Without extensive operational testing, such claims are speculative at best. Comparing China's limited experience with AESA radars in carrier environments to the decades of refinement by the U.S. Navy underscores the gap. Western analysts constantly point out that China still requires decades of technological advancement and operational experience to match the capabilities of U.S. carrier strike groups. Ironically, in July, commercial satellite images showed the Shandong operating near the Philippines. In response, Rear Admiral Roy Vincent Trinidad of the Philippine Navy remarked that while the Chinese Navy is more advanced than that of the Philippines, it still lacks the experience to conduct full-scale carrier operations. It would take decades for China to catch up. While the U.S. Navy may not flaunt its capabilities through promotional videos, it has spent decades operating globally, building an unmatched depth of carrier experience. If China believes that a few training missions per year can bridge this gap, it's indulging in wishful thinking. It may not be long before another incident, like the failure to detect a nearby U.S. carrier. Despite future propaganda about new carriers, those who pay attention will recognize the same patterns of trial and error, patching up weaknesses as they arise. By continuing to aggressively promote the carrier myth, China risks exposing more cracks. Beneath the grandiose rhetoric lies a fleet riddled with vulnerabilities.